The young pilgrim expels his seminal fluid inside the protesting native woman. "Stop your belly aching," he says as he strikes her across the back of the head with a rock, rendering her unconscious.
"Brother Alcorn?"
Faith, one of the Mayflower's Sunday school teachers, says as she pushes a tree branch aside and enters the clearing. Brother Alcorn quickly withdraws his member from the native woman and stashes her unconscious body in the brush. "Sister Faith, how nice to see you," he says, wiping leftover semen onto his trousers and buckling the buckle on his hat.
"Father Brothersby has prepared a feast and has asked me to gather everyone,"
she states without confidence. "Thank you, Faith. I'll be there post-haste," he says while stretching his back and twisting at the hips to say, "Leave me alone now." As Faith exits the clearing, Brother Alcorn ducks behind the bush to check on the unconscious native. He drapes fallen leaves and twigs over her until she is completely camouflaged, and then heads to the feast. Though the Pilgrims had only landed on the American shore a few days ago, their carpentry skills and sense of community had led to a nice little settlement already springing up near the shoreline. A dozen or so quaint houses, the framework of a church, and a one-room schoolhouse had been put together quickly with the help of the native people. Brother Alcorn waves to Brother Hamilton as he continues his trek to the center of town. "Brother Alcorn, we missed you at prayer this afternoon," Brother Hamilton remarks with a soft punch to Brother Alcorn's arm. Brother Alcorn laughs politely. "I was just surveying the land," he says with a small grin. As the two men round the corner, they are greeted with a sizable feast spread out over multiple tables. At the center of the tables sat Father Brothersby, who had been unceremoniously promoted to be their leader after no one else bothered to throw their buckled hat into the ring. "Brothers and sisters," Father Brothersby says as he clears his throat. Slowly, the 50 or so pilgrims begin to quiet down. "Let us take a moment to remember the good word of Isaiah 61:11. For as the earth brings forth its sprouts, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to sprout up before all the nations." "Amen," one of the more boisterous pilgrims shouts out. "Let us sit together and give thanks. Thanks to God and thanks to one another." He pauses to survey his crowd. "But let us not forget, too, the words listed in Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore encourage one another and build one another up." He pauses for dramatic effect. Brother Hamilton wipes a tear from his eye. "It is in this very spirit, my dear friends and fellow pilgrims, that I have invited our native counterparts to attend this very feast," Father Brothersby says matter-of-factly as the audience erupts in quiet murmurs. I know, they are, let's say, less advanced than we. But God's love knows no bounds. And without the help of our native, savage friends, this settlement would not be nearly as far along as it is," he says triumphantly. Some of the pilgrims applaud. A young woman steps forward and quietly states, "Without the native women, we wouldn't have this new glorious dish," she says, holding up cooked cobs of maize with slats of margarine melting on top. "Thank you, Sister Aloysius. My brethren, please choose a seat. Our native friends will arrive shortly," Father Brothersby says with a nod to the church choir, who break into a rendition of Ave Maria. The crowd begins to find their seats as Brother Alcorn and Brother Hamilton make their way to the center table. "This should be fun, huh, Brother Alcorn?" Brother Hamilton says with another playful punch to Brother Alcorn's arm. Rubbing his arm, Brother Alcorn thinks to himself, "Fun and sexually arousing." Eternal Blossom touches her finger to her temple again and feels the same response. "Nothing. I am telling you, Chief Star Blanket, one who is like a flower of the prairie's energy is not speaking to me," Eternal Blossom says with much worry in her voice. Chief Star Blanket is a very quiet, pensive man. He doesn't connect with spirit energy in the same way as Eternal Blossom, so he usually defers to her wisdom in matters such as this.
"What was her last known activity?"
he finally asks. She was gathering berries near that new settlement by the water, Eternal Blossom says, amplifying her worry tenfold. Chief Starblanket paces around the fire, crossing his arms and thinking to himself. Perhaps, he says after a solid 5 minutes of silence, she decided to go straight to the feast. We shall inquire about her when we arrive. And with that, the decision final, Chief Starblanket gathers the rest of his tribe and starts the trek to the English settlement. Brother Alcorn gazes out at the ocean and replays his sexual encounter over and over again. He hadn't been looking for anything in particular when he stumbled upon the young native woman on her hands and knees gathering berries near their settlement. He watched her quietly for a few minutes, and it was in this time that Brother Alcorn convinced himself she was something other than human. Her primal instincts were what motivated her. She was out here in the middle of the day, squatting, nearly naked on her hands and knees, posterior raised high in the air, without a care in the world. All of the women on the Mayflower had been prudish. "I'm married," or "I've made a commitment with the Lord," was all he had heard again and again on the way over here. And the men? Well, sure, they'd all gotten together and given each other a right old tug, but that wasn't something they could do that often. But here, in this forest, was a young woman who, by the way of her culture, had no inhibitions and no shame. It was very enticing to Brother Alcorn, and it didn't take long before he was on top of her, inside her, and in pure bliss, despite, or perhaps because of, her endless protesting. Suddenly, a tribal call rings out, signaling the arrival of the natives. Per Father Brothersby's coaxing, the settlement of pilgrims rises to their feet to greet them. "Good morrow, dear friends," Brothersby says as he crosses the short distance and shakes hands with the tribal chief. "Peace to you all," the chief states broadly. Everyone applauds, and the natives take their seats amongst the pilgrims. "Let us break bread," Brothersby announces. Everyone digs in and has a marvelous meal. Though one who is like a flower of the prairie was nowhere to be found, the natives are amazed by the English ways of cooking, their clothing, their stories. The pilgrims devoured every new recipe and food items the natives could show them. All in all, everyone had a splendid time, even, perhaps especially, Brother Alcorn, who surveyed the crowd for more potential sexual encounters. "It is swollen and open to 2 times its normal size," Eternal Blossom says to the chief, their daughter, one who was like a flower of the prairie, spread eagle in front of him, having just returned sobbing to her settlement. Chief Starblanket uncomfortably gazes into his daughter's vagina. "And you're sure it was one of the Englishmen who did this to you?" he asks the young girl directly. She continues to cry as she nods her head. Eternal Blossom cradles her daughter's head and glares at Chief Starblanket to say, "What the fuck are you going to do?" Chief Starblanket dons his tribal headdress, gives a nod to the 2 women, and heads into the night. Brother Alcorn had raced back to his hiding place after dinner, hoping to expel more semen into the native woman he'd stashed there earlier. Much to his shock and dismay, the woman had gone. Most likely, she'd woken up and gone back to her tribe. Perhaps she'd been taken by wolves. Brother Alcorn shudders with jealousy as a third option, one of his fellow pilgrims had taken her and had their way with her, popped into his mind. Regardless, there was nothing he could do about it now, short of tracking her down. Brother Alcorn would have to be content with reliving the moment in his mind only. Suddenly, an unexpected tribal yell rings out from the forest. Brother Alcorn's body instantly snaps into high alert. Are they about to be ambushed? Was he about to be confronted for his actions? He quickly puts his buckled shoes back on and rushes outside to find Father Brothersby and a few armed pilgrims talking to the tribal leader. "She returned to us with an injury on her skull and in her nether regions. She says it was one of the men from your settlement," the chief says matter-of-factly. Father Brothersby shakes his head and makes some tisk-tisk noises before escorting the chief into the nearby one-room schoolhouse. "You just wait in here and and we'll get to the bottom of this, Father Brothersby says, pulling the door shut behind him. He looks around incredulously to his guards and then to Brother Alcorn. He sits momentarily on the porch of the schoolhouse and then says the 5 words he always hoped he wouldn't have to say. "Bring me the smallpox." Inside a small syringe, frozen and packed deep in the Mayflower's bowels, had been a sample of a virus called smallpox. The King of England had packed it as a special precaution for just this purpose, biological warfare. Though Father Brothersby had hoped he could fulfill God's desire of working side by side with any human being, he had come to realize that this wasn't going to be possible. Some of them really were just savage. Father Brothersby waited on the porch until finally the vial was retrieved. With Brother Alcorn by his side, the 2 men walk into the schoolhouse to confront the tribal chief. "Did you find the attacker?" he asks. Father Brothersby glances at Brother Alcorn and then back to the chief. "Yes," he says demurely. "Then who is it?" the chief asks. Brother Alcorn circles behind Chief Starblanket while Father Brothersby distracts him. As he pulls out the syringe, the chief senses the motion and turns back just in time to have the full syringe of smallpox injected into his cheek. "Ow!" he screams. "What are you doing to me? We only wanted retribution for the attacker," he pleads.
I fucked that girl, and I can't wait to do it again, Brother Alcorn says, smiling.
"You?" Chief Starblanket says, shocked. "You attacked my daughter?"
No, I don't think of it like that, Brother Alcorn says.
Did she agree to the act?" Chief Starblanket asks, thinking that Brother Alcorn is implying their relationship was consensual. Brother Alcorn laughs. No. I don't think of her as human. Chief Starblanket twists his face in confusion as itchy welts start springing up all over his skin. A single tear rolls down his chiseled face as he says, "It is not we who will be remembered as the savages." With that, he excuses himself to the door, exits into the forest, never to be seen again. Returning to his tribe, scarred and marred with itchy bumps, Chief Starblanket lies and tells everyone he was able to retaliate against the attacker, and that they were able to retaliate themselves given his appearance. However, he was sure to tell his daughter the man had paid the ultimate price, death, for his actions. Chief Starblanket sat in close proximity that night to everyone in his tribe and, without fully understanding what had been injected into him, gave everyone else the smallpox. Within days, they were all dead, their immune systems completely unprepared for a foreign disease. Brother Alcorn and some of the other more sexually depraved men from the settlement go down once or twice a week and have their way with a few of the deceased natives. It's not as good as it is when they were alive, but they were thankful nonetheless. End. That was Brother Alcorn at the first Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, folks. Lest we forget that there was a massive genocide against the indigenous people of our country when the Pilgrims and Christopher Columbus and the like discovered this country. And all our life, we've kind of been told how great it was that the Pilgrims worked hand in hand with the natives, and they just everybody just loved each other, and we all got along, and they were so excited to show us about turkeys and corn on the cob, and we were so excited to teach them about farming tools and irrigation, and it was just a bloody good relationship. Well, honestly, folks, that's not what happened. The Pilgrims came here, set up shop, just showed up one day, set up shop, said, "Up, this is ours now," and then raped and killed a bunch of people. And, of course, maybe there was a Thanksgiving dinner where they all sat down and they were like, "Hey, maybe thanks for showing us how to cook a turkey, or showing us what a turkey is," because originally, they were only in North America. Well, guess what, folks? Even if it happened, it doesn't excuse the horrible atrocities that were committed against the native people of this country and that are still committed to this day. And it's so unbelievably sad what we've done to these people. And so I just want to say, all of the names of the native people in this story, what the hell were they? Elegant Breast, that's not one of them. Eternal Blossom, and the Chief, and their daughter. All of those names that I mentioned were actual Native American names that were, the English translation of those names. So though they are kind of wild and outlandish, it's not to make fun. They're real names. So fuck you for thinking I'd put fake names of native people in here when I'm trying to make a story that talks about how bad we were to the native people.
I'm just a small town boy from Appalachia.